Adobe terminating its $20 billion deal to acquire the design software maker Figma. Let's get out west to Deirdre Bosa. That is the subject of today's Tech Check. Dee.
Hey, David, good morning. Let's talk about what it means for both parties going forward. Adobe, it's going to be just fine. Figma, though, perhaps its future a little less certain. When the deal was announced 15 months ago, there was sticker shock at the price. Adobe was willing to pay double Figma's valuation at the time and 50 times its annual recurring revenue. But while trying to get this deal done, Shantanu and the Adobe team, it hasn't slowed down. It's very much been a part of the Wall Street generative AI conversation with Firefly, and it has continued to develop Adobe Express, a real-time collaboration tool that does some of what Figma was supposed to do for the company. Plus, Adobe shares, they are up over 60% since the deal was announced, and a major overhang regulatory uncertainty that is now removed. There's even hope, guys, that Adobe could use the cash that it earmarked for Figma for an expanded buyback. So shares are up nearly 2% today. For Figma itself, though, this is a very tough crossroads. On top of the $20 billion that Adobe was going to pay for it, there was an historic $2.3 billion retention package for Figma CEO Dylan Field and employees, leading to jokes here in the Bay Area that drinks were on Figma employees for the rest of 2022. Now, however, it may be the Figma employees needing those consolation drinks tonight, and they are unlikely to see those kinds of terms again. And potential other acquirers, like, say, a Microsoft, are probably less likely to do a deal given the regulatory challenges. The IPO market also, guys, not exactly open. And Figma's closest competitor, Canva, has not been in regulatory limbo for the last 15 months. I did just get off the phone with a Figma board member, Andrew Reed. He is partner at Sequoia, which first invested back in 2019, the Series C round. He said that Figma, though, has not been standing still either over the past 15 months. He notes the company has been releasing its own AI plugins, and earlier this year it acquired Diagram. That is a startup building at the intersection of design and AI. He said that big tech companies like Microsoft, Apple, and Google, they continue to use Figma within their design teams. And of course, that $1 billion breakup fee will help them be, as Reed put it, firmly on the offensive over the next year. Now, on the regulatory front, guys, there is building frustration here in Silicon Valley. One investor called the Adobe Figma process long, opaque, and Byzantine. And that sort of is a feeling that has been building and sort of feeds into that question, what now for Figma? Maybe an IPO in a few years from now. But again, that market is not exactly wide open.
No. The UK antitrust regulator and the EU, not to mention, of course, in other deals, as you well know, facing serious scrutiny here from the FTC or the DOJ. What about Adobe, though? Dee, you know, you mentioned at the time they paid this enormous price. Their stock went down a lot, and then they spent a lot of time educating their investor base on why this was helpful to them for their strategic posture, so to speak. So what do they do now that they're not going to own this thing?
You know, David, I think the world has changed so much in the last 2 years with the generative AI that on one hand, yes, they were trying to justify this deal to some shareholders that might have been skeptical, particularly on that high price tag. But they've also been developing internally, right? I think Firefly has very much been part of this generative AI conversation and provided perhaps another thesis for the company and shown that they can build organically. I think that was the fear when Adobe made this play for Figma, that it was somehow falling behind, and Figma was, you know, really beloved inside of Microsoft. And there was this idea that maybe Microsoft would get a leg up on Adobe, but Adobe has certainly answered back over the last few years under Shantanu Narayan and been able to prove to the street that they can still innovate and produce these products very separately from a Figma. So I think Figma maybe occupied a different space a few years ago.